You guys, we're now recording, and I just want to tell y'all need to listen to instructions. She said, do that at the end, and y'all started doing it right then. So please listen to our producer, smile at the end for the thumbnail shots.
We are live, and I do apologize for all of our listeners. That was a carryover intro that my father just decided to do. So yes, our producer Alana, who does a very good job, has instructed us how our faces need to look because thumbnails get on YouTube when we do this.
Right. And
so
I'm the worst offender.
Now
I have no expression most of the time.
Well, now we make faces at each other, and we make her choose really awful looking pictures.
Hey, I know you're going to introduce the sponsor in just a moment before we start hearing the wonderful pontification of Ryan Burge, but I got to tell you, this content is something that I have been looking forward to. This online church or the online worship service, man, he is going to peel back the layers, and we're going to see reality.
This may not be your most widely read article that you wrote about, Ryan, but it has been my favorite. It's just my personal favorite.
Thanks, buddy.
Because it revealed a lot of things that I was feeling and kind of
love confirmation
thought, but now I have data behind it. And so now I get to say, well, I actually know this for a fact because Dr. Ryan Burge showed me the facts. So we're going to be talking about online church, who attends and who's tuning in. And all of my speculation was proven right by Ryan, so it's always a good thing. But before we get into today's episode, we certainly want to thank our sponsor, Tidely. Tidely has been very generous to pay our bills for us and to have this show together. Tidely provides churches around the world with all sorts of software tools. I am sure that they have something for you if you happen to be in the market for any sort of system operation that your church needs, whether it be text to give, managing people's information, volunteer management, check in, check out. They do it all. They've got church apps, they do websites. And they're a team of ministry-minded people that love the local church. So get this, you can go to Tidely.com and sign up for free. Tidely's platform comes with no monthly fees or contracts. So you can get started taking donations at Tidely.com. They also have a great State of the Church Giving report that you can check out in the show notes of today's episode. It's a free download as well. So thank you, Tidely, and all of you listeners, go to Tidely.com.
And a shout out to Dean Sweetman. Shout out to Dean Sweetman, the CEO of Tidely, our good friend, who has just done so much for us. So we're greatly appreciative, Dean.
Indeed. Right. Ryan, when you wrote this, I was like, this is gold. This information is so important. Every church out there thinks that when they post digitally, that the community at large is tuning in to their services, but that's not the case. Tell us what's going on.
Oh, I'll just give you an anecdote. There's a big church somewhere in Kentucky that some of my former high school classmates work at now, and they post on Facebook, and I go on their YouTube channel to like see what they're up to. They have an entire online campus. I looked at one of their videos on YouTube. It had 48 views. 48 views. And I'm like, they have like a whole staff. I mean, I bet you they spent $100,000 on equipment for this whole thing. And guys,
that's like Wes Bradenton level. That's like how many people are tuning into me.
Look out.
We're actually more than that. Our views getting a few hundred. Toot my own horn.
Look at you. You're so successful. Well, I think that's the problem is like, and the more you live in this online space, because like, listen, I'm one of those guys who goes and looks at metrics because I'm a data guy. In my own stuff and other stuff, you realize that everyone's producing content, but almost no one's consuming said content. It's like a 90-10 principle. Like 10% of the content is consumed by 90% of the people. You know, like it's very few getting a whole lot, and most people don't get any. I think that's very much the case when it comes to online worship. And so here's how I think this happened as best I can. Before COVID, there were some churches, larger churches, kind of those non-denom, those younger churches, like, let's go heavy online. Let's invest in a production team and cameras and yada, yada, yada. And they built up these huge online followings. I think we all know we're talking about here, Life Church and Elevation and Joel Osteen's deal, those kind of places, right? There were probably 30 or 40 like big ones. Then COVID happened, and every church in America is like, holy cow, we've got to figure out a way to stream our services online. So, they spent a little bit of money, maybe, a couple $1,000 getting better cameras and better streaming and bing, bang, boom. Now they're online. A lot of people were, well, not a lot of people, some people were watching online because they couldn't go in person because of COVID. And now they still see that 20 or 30 people log on and watch the service because they kept it going. And now they don't know what to do, right? Do we continue to put the man hours behind that and the money and the time and the energy behind that, keeping that stream going on? Are we growing this big online community? Should we shut it off? Should we invest more resources in it? How do we build a community with our online people? And I think the data points to a solution where it's, man, online church is probably never, ever going to even come close to what in-person gathering is. And for most churches, it's probably not a great use of their time and resources.
And when you look at online church, you have to ask the question, how much of that is really the church? I know that that's a deep theological question, but how much of church is supposed to be incarnate? How much is supposed to be, you're supposed to be there? There are a lot of liberal scholars arguing now, even atheistic liberal scholars, that are saying, we want the church back. We want the religious community back, and we want them to come together because they're seeing the benefit of, and you've talked about this in terms of a lot of organizations, Ryan, but we want to see them come together in person because that's where the benefit is. And we're seeing particularly for this Gen Y generation that is a lot of nuns.
Let me just tell you, there's empirical evidence. There was a paper that was just published about 6 months ago. Question was psychological distress. What predicts psychological distress or lower psychological distress? They looked at church attendance. No matter how much you attended online, there was no difference in your psychological distress. But amongst people who attended in-person church on a weekly basis, there was a lower level of psychological distress amongst that group.
Wow.
So going to church only in person relieves some psychological distress and helps with mental illness. Going online has no demonstrable impact on your mental health. And that's what I would tell people. This is not just I prefer something. It's the data tells us that online is a poor substitute for in-person gathering, whether it be, by the way, religious or non-religious, but especially in the religious space. We talk about, communing together and being in one space and the embodiment of what that means. I just don't think that online worship should be seen as a full substitute for what it means to gather together on a regular basis.
But you do like it as a supplement and something that points to something else.
And I think that's an important point, though. So who is watching online church? That's a really important question. And here's what I found. The people who attend in person more are more likely to also watch online services. Okay. There's this term in consumer economics about super heavy users. These are people who cannot get enough of a certain type of content. They'll watch 8 or 10 hours a day. This is an example of super heavy users. We're talking about people who go to church multiple times a week in person. So it means Sunday gathering, but also midweek Bible study and maybe something else. They're also watching a ton of religious services online too. So they might go to First Baptist Church of, Jonesboro, Arkansas, but then on Tuesday they're watching Elevation, or they're watching Joel Osteen, they're watching TD Jakes, they're watching somebody else. So it's not like it's the online church is drawing in people who don't go in person. It's actually just giving those super heavy users more content to consume.
That's fascinating.
I mean, we can talk. Yeah, but we could talk about is that objectively good or bad? I got no strong feelings about that, but I'm a big believer in orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Both matter. Right belief matters, but also right behavior matters nearly as much. And if all you're doing is watching church services every day, all day, and you're not serving your community, seems kind of bad. We should motivate you to go into the mission field and do things, not just watch another worship service after we're done.
Hey, the heavy users, Nellie Joe. You haven't met Nellie
Who's
Joe.
Nellie Joe?
My wife.
No.
His mother.
Oh boy.
Yes, you'll meet her in Bradenton very soon. Nellie Joe is a heavy user of online services. So this is an example. We were at West Bradenton. We heard Sam preach. We're driving somewhere else. she's on her phone watching a service. I said, which service are you watching? Oh, the one we just came from. And I said, why? Because don't you know he is the best preacher in God's creation, right there with his brother Jess? So there's an online user. That's probably not your subsample, though.
Your wife is not my only. By the way, people who attend church more than once a week, or 60% of them watch church online at least once a week as well. So think about that.
Wow.
You're going multiple times a week in person, and most of you are also watching online. So I think that also distorts too, because this is the thing I hear. Oh, our view count, or like the number of people we have log in is da-da-da-da, and it's like 10,000 or whatever. And you're like, okay, you cannot create, that's not an equivalent of 10,000 people in butts in seats. It just does not work that way. It's passive versus active. It's how many minutes they were there. Like there's no way to create a metric that evens the scale between in-person worship and online attendance. Like and I think a lot of times these algorithms will inflate numbers in such a way that make you feel like you're doing a lot better than what you are. Like, I mean, like I've done certain media appearances where like, oh, I'm going to get a big bump on my side, like in terms of views and follows and subscribers, and you don't even see it. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of like smoke and mirrors going on here too. I think a lot of churches are just stuck because they're going, oh, we got 300 people that log on online. We can't turn it off, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And all these people are watching. And it's like, are you sure they're actually watching? Like, I'm not entirely convinced that you're actually providing the service that you think you are.
You bring up something very important, because when we consult churches, we just did one recently, won't get into all the details here, but they told us their attendance was at a certain level. Let's just say 1,000. That's roughly where they were. And then we go and we visit on like in their service, and it's 300-400. You go, well, where are the rest of those? We're 600 people. Well, that's our online attendance. Well, how are you counting your online attendance? Well, we're taking our views and we're multiplying them by a factor of 2.5, because we assume.
Or 3.5, the multiplier effect.
Or
yes.
3.5, or whatever it is. Yeah, we'll just say 2.5, because that's a pretty common multiplier. We're just assuming that there are more people on that screen watching it. And it's like, that is a terrible way to count your attendance because of the things that you have revealed here. The view is actually, now some people live stream, so they know that those views are not butts in the seats because they're watching at the same time that people are there. But for a lot of people that are counting views, it's people viewing it afterwards. And in our case, we pre-produce our services, so it's a lot of our own people that are watching. I didn't catch that one part of a sermon, so I want to rewatch it, in the service that's online. And I'm going to call this, Dad, I'm going to name this phenomenon, and I'm going to call it the Margaret effect, the Miss Margaret effect.
She's
so
one of my
Miss
favorites.
Margaret, and she's listening right now. So, hey, Margaret, we love you.
Absolutely. Ryan loves you too.
She's a super consumer. She will come to church. She's there every week. She's there anytime the doors are open, but she's also watching. So we post our pre-produced service on Saturday night. So she's watching that before she comes to church. She may watch it again after church. She then tunes over to Jess. I don't know if you know this, Dad, but she goes home and she watches my brother Jess preach. Then she's back at church serving again. Now, am I glad that our content is being consumed in that way by our own people? Absolutely. I think it's wonderful, but we have to know what it's doing. When you're posting your content out there and you get 100 views or whatever it is on a sermon, a large portion of that is Miss Margaret. It's your mom. It's the person that missed that point in the sermon. They want to double check again. It's a great tool. It's a wonderful thing. You're not reaching the community with your online services, though. And I think that's the important part here. Stop counting them as attendees in your church. They were already there. They were there on Sunday. And stop assuming that you've got this mass audience out there, because it's more than likely your own people.
Can I give you an analogy to the tech world about this?
Please.
Podcasts. Okay. Podcast advertising rates were sky high for a long time because you could go to advertise and say, we've got this many downloads of our podcast per week. Because Apple Podcasts used to automatically, there's a queue. You could automatically download episodes when they came out every morning when you're on Wi-Fi. That way, when you're traveling, you could have them on your thing. You know what they did not count? How many people actually listened to the episode? So they were basically selling advertisers on this listenership that was 8-10 times the multiple of what it actually was. And now they have better technology that will actually tell you like when people dropped off from the podcast. And so now advertiser rates have plunged in the podcast world because the actual number of listeners is a fraction of what we thought it was for a while. I think this same thing applies to like viewing church streams. We overinflate it when really we should probably be like a tenth of those numbers, the actual number. And I think listen, you've got to think who's selling you this stuff. And if it's someone like, we've got new video equipment, like this is how many streams people get when they go upgrade to our equipment and our technology, guys. Like, I think the reality is whatever number you think you're getting online, like real honest to goodness people who engage every week in a meaningful way, is probably a tenth of what you think it is. Let's just be real about this.
That's what we hear from the 23 million who listen to each of our podcasts, that, hey, there's not 50 million. There's only 23 million.
Only 23 million? That's rookie numbers. Got to up those numbers.
Well, with you here, it'll continue to increase.
And yes, that's why we have Ryan, because we have now realized what our real numbers are, and we've got to get them back up.
Get them back up. By the way, can I mention the fact that even young people don't prefer online worship? Like the whole thing, like digital native thing, like that's the argument. Like, oh, young people love being online. They're online all the time. The question was, do you prefer in person? Do you prefer online, or do you not have a preference? And these are people who went at least once a month on both. So they actually have like they have a good comparison group. Amongst the youngest adults, 18 to 29, 67% said they prefer in person, 19% said they prefer online, and 14% had no preference.
Wow.
So 2/3 of young people say they prefer the in-person worship. And amongst people who were 65 and up, 86% of them preferred in person and 3% of them preferred online. So like that, it's bad amongst young adults. It's terrible amongst the oldest adults. Like you cannot find a group of people, a significantly sized group of people who really will say, I'll go to church online for the rest of my life and it's going to be great.
But it's such a convenient excuse if you're not showing up. Oh, I'm watching it online. That's what it has become.
But let me make this point though. And I know there's people online who are listening to this right now saying, well, I cannot physically come to worship. I hear you, I see you, and I understand you. Okay. And I do think the move to online has been very beneficial for that subsegment of the population. That's without a doubt. But what's happened though is people who should be there in person are coming online because it's easier. In economics, there's this concept called friction, right? You want to have as least amount of friction as you possibly can for people to make a certain kind of decision. And you know what? If my choice between going online or going in person, which one has more friction? Going in person does, because I got to get dressed and drive my car and show up and all that stuff. So here's what you should do. Here's just a suggestion. Try this out. Don't publish your streams easily on social media and YouTube, right? Make people email someone at the church to get a link that they can use to access the stream on some website that's not publicly available.
Because if you're radical.
I know, right? Because what that's going to do is if I'm genuinely a shut-in or I'm on vacation or I'm sick, I've got no problem emailing the secretary and asking for the link because I need it. I really need it for my own reasons. But if I'm just lazy, that's going to create enough friction that I'm not going to want to email because I'm going to feel guilty about it. And I'll be much more likely to show up because I can't watch the stream online. So create an impediment between those kind of people and the stream. And you might have a list of people who automatically get the link every Sunday because they're genuinely shut-ins, makes their life easy. But you've got to rethink how you distribute this link and this video stream and this information, because right now you're making it super easy for people to not show up, and you should be the opposite. It should be, you know what I mean? Like coming in person should be easier than coming online. And right now it's nowhere close.
That's radical.
I think we can also say that this isn't just a matter of who's really tuning in. It's also a matter of how well you're tuning in while you're watching. Now, clearly people are on their phones in the in-person services too. But I know myself, and I know how well I pay attention when I've got something just on the screen, particularly like a church service. And even if you're tuning into the whole video, it's easier to tune out than if you are in person. So I think that there's some real practical things here when it comes to why in person is more important than like an online service. But there's some theological considerations here too, that, it's really not the purpose of our show to get into all the theology. That's just not what we do here. But I personally have an ecclesiological conviction that church is meant to be in person. There may be those who disagree with me on that, but that's fine. But I do think that theologically it's better for you spiritually if you're there in person, not online. So we've got super consumers. That's who's really tuning in. You're likely not reaching the community because they're unchurched. Why would they watch church service? It's like, it's the whole, we're the church for the unchurched. It's like, no, you're not. You're just marketing to baby boomers who think that's cool. That's all you're doing. We're all the unchurched people are tuning into us. Well, that means they're churched. They're no longer unchurched.
So listen, here's the definition I created, right? You watch online services once a week, but you report in-person worship gathering once a year or less. Okay. What percentage of the entire sample meets that criteria? They go to church in person once a year or less, but they go to online worship every week. It is less than 5% of America. Wow. Less than 5% of America.
Which is probably your shut-ins and people who can't get out.
And if you look at the demographics, here's what they look like. In terms of age, they tend to be older. About 70% of that group are 50 and up. Okay, so they lean older, which would make sense from a shut-in perspective. They also are more likely to be on the lower end of the educational spectrum. Okay, 43% of them have a high school diploma or less, compared to 35% of the general population, so slightly less educated. And it's actually, in terms of race, African Americans are twice as likely to be virtual attenders as all African Americans in the entire sample. So the mix is older, lower educated African Americans. Those are a huge chunk of your 4.8%, your online only attenders. So I don't know who you think they are in your head. It's not the youths. If you think this is some sort of program to bring in the Generation Z people, you are failing miserably at that. This should be the opposite of what you should be doing. And by the way, you're seeing this on surveys. A lot of young people are realizing that screens are ruining their lives. They're really there's a backlash coming, I feel like, amongst younger generations of being a little less online because they've grown up online. I don't think they want to go to church online. And I think you're going to see, if you think that's your youth strategy, you should try literally anything else would be better than that as a youth strategy. Now, okay, can I give you one example of one way online might be a good idea? If you have a large shut-in community, and you really want to grow that community, and there's people who are socially isolated, is that better than them not having online church? It absolutely is. Is it a lot better? It's absolutely not. But I think you need to join that coming in every Sunday, that the shut-in community watching online. You need to have a pastor or someone on staff who goes out to them on a regular basis and talk, has a 1-hour meeting counseling with each of them just to connect them to the larger church. That's a lot of work. I think that's one area where I would say if you want to lean into online, the data says that is a way that could be successful and productive, both from a social science perspective, but also a pastoral, religious perspective as well.
That's the new senior adult ministry.
Could be. I mean, to me, I like when retired pastors want to still do a little bit of pastoring, so they'll do visitation ministry. To me, that's an ideal person to do something like that, is just pop in once a month, and say hello and have lunch or whatever it is. That's a way to create community with that group because they genuinely can't come. They can't get there physically. I think for everyone else, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to devote a lot of time and resources to creating online church.
Fascinating stuff, Sam.
Yes, indeed. Again, you can learn more about what Ryan is talking about in the written form at graphsaboutreligion.com. That's where his Substack is. You need to be a paying subscriber. This is stuff that you can use a ton. It's very practical.
Tom sent you.
It's data-driven. It's the facts. And you can count on Ryan to give you the facts. You can also count on Tithely to give you incredible service around church management systems, whether it be giving or check-in, whether it be volunteer management or communicating with your church. Tithely can help you. They do websites too. They probably do a lot more than you realize. They're known for their texting. They're known for their giving modules, and all of those are great. They service 40,000 churches around the world. The reason it's so many is because they're really good at what they do, and they would be glad to serve you. So you can sign up for free at tithely.com. They've got a giving platform that has no monthly fees and no contracts. Can't beat that. So go to tithely.com, start taking donations in just 5 minutes. They've also got a State of the Church giving report that you can find in the show notes. There's a link there for you to get that download. We want to thank Tithely for sponsoring today's episode. We want to thank Dr. Ryan Burge for these incredible series of podcasts that we've been able to do this year. We were just talking off air. We hope that he is able to do them again next year. So just a little
on
teaser.
the spot. Put him on the spot.
Well, I'm not going to put him on the spot. I'm just saying I'm hopeful. I'm just hopeful.
I'm hopeful as well.
Yeah.
So there we go. We will not do negotiation on the air. So we'll leave that for another time and another day. And we will hope that we get to see you all again in 2025 for the Burge Report, and more data is coming. So we'll see you then.